Hey World History. Today we are going to talk about Phase 2 of the French Revolution, which is known as the Reign of Terror. And yes, it is just as crazy as it sounds. So, let's get started. In 1793, the revolution entered its most radical phase. So radical, remember, means extreme. So let's talk about the engine of terror, and this comes from the top of page 585. A new execution device called the guillotine was introduced during this phase of the revolution. It had a large diagonal blade that came crashing down from a great height, and it cut off heads swiftly and accurately. Thousands of people were sent to the guillotine and executed without trial. In his novel A Tale of Two Cities, Charles Dickens describes daily life during the Reign of Terror. Along the Paris streets, the death carts rumble, hollow and harsh. 6 tumbrils, carts that carried condemned people to the guillotine, carry the day's wine to la guillotine. So ultimately, it's just, you hear the cart. If you lived in Paris, you would hear the carts going back and forth, taking condemned people to the guillotine to be executed. So things are getting tense, right? Okay, so we left yesterday where France had declared war on, everybody. Prussia, Britain, Austria, and several other places. Needless to say, going to war when your own country is in chaos is not necessarily a very good idea. And so the wars aren't going well. Well-trained Prussian forces are cutting down raw French recruits who have never really been trained. In addition, royalist officers are deserting the French army. They're joining emigres and others hoping to restore the king's power. So some of your leaders who had led France in other wars, notably even helping out with the American Revolution, they're leaving because they don't want to deal with this craziness. They think it's wrong. And so tensions lead to violence. Battle disasters quickly inflamed revolutionaries, who thinks the king is now in league with the enemies. On August 10th, 1792, a crowd of Parisians stormed the royal palace and slaughtered the king's guard. The royal family fled to the Legislative Assembly. A month later, citizens attacked prisons that held nobles and priests accused of political offenses. Almost 1,200 prisoners were killed. Among them, many ordinary criminals in prison, just maybe they'd stolen something. Historians disagree about the people who carried out these September massacres. Some called them bloodthirsty mobs, others described them as patriots defending France from its enemies. In fact, most were just ordinary citizens who were fired to fury by grievances that were both real and some were imagined. So those were called the September massacres. Okay, and then radicals take control. So backed by Paris crowds, radicals then take control of the Legislative Assembly. People call for the election of the new legislative body called the National Convention. Suffrage, the right to vote, was to be extended to all male citizens, not just male citizens who owned property. The convention that met in September of 1792 was a more radical body than early assemblies. It voted to abolish the monarchy and establish a republic. Okay, so convention. So they literally just voted to no longer have a king. That's kind of a very extreme deal. Yeah. So deputies then drew up a new constitution. The Jacobins, who we talked about yesterday, who controlled the convention, set out to erase all traces of the old order. They wanted to completely change France. They seized lands of nobles, abolished titles of nobility, and during the early months of the Republic, the convention also put Louis XVI on trial as a traitor to France. The king was convicted by a single vote and sentenced to death. On a foggy morning in January 1793, Louis mounted a scaffold in a public square in France. He started to speak. He said, "Frenchmen, I die innocent. I pardon the authors of my death. I pray God that the blood about to be spilt will never fall upon the head of France." Then a roll of drums drowned out the rest of his words. Moments later, he was beheaded. In October, so 10 months later, his wife, Marie Antoinette, was also executed. The popular press celebrated her death, but the queen did show great dignity on her way to her death. So this is all happening in 1793. So in January, king is executed. And in October, the queen is executed. So kind of similar to what was happening in Great Britain about 150 years before this, where they voted to execute the king and queen, or the king. So then terror and danger gripped France. Now at this point, nobody knows who's in charge. By early 1793, danger threatened France on all sides. The country is at war for most of Europe, including Britain, the Netherlands, Spain, and Prussia, who quite literally surrounds them. In the Vendée region of France, royalists and priests are leading peasants in rebellion against the government. Which government? We don't really know anymore. In Paris, the Sans-Culottes demanded relief from food shortages and inflation. They're like, we want food. The convention itself was bitterly divided between Jacobins and a rival group called the Girondins. And so then the convention creates a new committee. To deal with all of the threats to France, the convention creates something called the Committee of Public Safety. Now, putting so much effort into telling the citizens that they were for public safety might have been a little bit of a misnomer. The committee prepared France for all-out war. They issued a levy en masse, or mass levy, which is a tax that required all citizens to contribute to the war effort. In addition, the 12 members of the committee were in charge of trials and executions. Okay, so a mass levy, which is a tax, and then they were in charge of trials and executions. Fun. Spurred by revolutionary fervor, French recruits march off to defend the Republic. Young officers develop effective new tactics to win battles of ill-trained but very patriotic forces. Soon the French armies overran the Netherlands. They later invaded Italy. So now the war effort's starting to turn around a little bit. At home, they crushed peasant revolts. European monarchs shuddered as the revolutionaries are carrying this freedom fever into conquered lands. So then you have Robespierre, this guy, Maximilien Robespierre. At home, the government is battling these counter-revolutionaries under the guiding hand of Maximilien Robespierre. Robespierre is a lawyer and a politician, and he's the leader of the Committee of Public Safety. Okay? So Maximilien Robespierre. And he's now in charge of the committee. His selfless dedication to the revolution earned him the nickname the Incorruptible. Obviously, those opposed called him a tyrant because he was very much in charge. Robespierre embraced Rousseau's idea of the general will as the source of all legitimate law. He promoted religious toleration. He wanted to abolish slavery. He was cold. He was humorless, but he was popular because a lot of the sans-culottes, in particular, hated the old regime as much as he did. He believed that France could achieve a republic of virtue only through the use of terror, which he defined as nothing more than prompt, severe, inflexible justice. So he's basically saying terror is just justice. Liberty cannot be secured unless criminals lose their heads, he said. So then you have the guillotine. Robespierre was one of the chief architects of the Reign of Terror, which lasted from September of 1793 to July of 1794. Okay, so 1793 to 1794 is this Reign of Terror. And Robespierre is really one of the leaders of it. You have revolutionary courts. They're conducting these hasty trials. Everybody's cheering death sentences, like, Hail the Republic. In a speech given in February of 1794, Robespierre explained why the terror was necessary. He said, it's necessary to stifle the domestic and foreign enemies of the Republic or perish with them. The first maxim of our politics ought to be to lead the people by means of reason, and the enemies of the people by terror. If the basis of the popular government in time of peace is virtue, then the basis of the popular government in time of revolution is virtue and terror. So he's basically saying you need terror to make an effective government during this point. Anybody who resisted the revolution was automatically under suspicion. About 300,000 were arrested. About 17,000 were executed. Many of them were victims of mistaken identity or false accusation by frightened neighbors. Many more of them were packed into prisons, where when you pack a lot of people into a prison, they're going to get diseases and die. The engine of terror was the guillotine, that fast-falling blade. There's a picture in your book on page 588. A member of the legislature, Dr. Joseph Guillotin, had introduced it as a more humane method of beheading because it was quicker, but it quickly becomes this instrument of terror. Within a year, the terror consumed those who initiated it. So this terror that these people, that the Committee of Public Safety starts to get to them too. On the night of July 27th, 1794, Robespierre was arrested and executed the next day. And after they started to die, after the radicals in charge of the Committee of Public Safety started to get executed, the amount of radicalism in the revolution started to slowly decrease. Okay? So that's one of the reasons why it ends in 1794. So 7 of 1794. Robespierre is executed. So then the revolution enters its third stage. Moving away from the excess of the convention, you have more moderates, and they're drafting a third constitution. So remember, this is the third constitution in 5 years. The Constitution of 1795 sets up a 5-man directory. So that's why this stage is called the directory. Because now your form of government, as set up by the Constitution, is a directory. It's a 2-house legislature and a 5-man directory. The legislature is elected by any male citizen who owns property. The middle class and professional people of the bourgeoisie are now the dominant force, and the directory holds power for 4 years. Weak but dictatorial, they're facing growing discontent. Peace was made with Prussia and Spain, but war with Austria and Great Britain continues. So you make peace with 2 countries, but you're still fighting 2 countries, and they're 2 very powerful countries. Corrupt leaders are still in charge all over France, and they're taking money from the people while others go hungry. Inflation is still happening, and people are getting so hungry that they're wanting to riot again, but the directory immediately shuts that down. Another threat to the directory is actually people saying, well, I think it was actually better when we had a king, so maybe we should have a king again. Many emigres are now returning. Devout Catholics who were angry about that were saying, yes, come back. And then in the election of 1797, supporters of a constitutional monarchy are actually winning the majority. So now, less than 10 years later, you have this total switch where people are saying, well, this was so bad that maybe we should have a king again. As chaos is threatening, the politicians turn to Napoleon Bonaparte, who was a popular military hero who had won a series of victories against the Austrians in Italy. The politicians planned to use him to advance their own goals, but Napoleon was smarter than they were, and he was planning on outwitting them all and becoming ruler of all France. So by 1799, the 10-year-old French Revolution had dramatically changed France, dislodged the old social order, overthrown the monarchy, brought the Catholic Church under state control, which up until this point had never been done, and new symbols such as red liberty caps and the tricolor, which is France's flag now, red, white, and blue, symbolized liberty, equality of all citizens if you were a guy. Women still didn't count yet. This new title, citizen, applied to everybody, rich, poor. All other titles were eliminated. They got rid of nobles. Before he was executed, Louis wasn't called King Louis. He was called Citizen Capet because his last name, his dynasty name was Capet. And so he was just called Citizen Capet. They didn't call him king. Elaborate fashions and powdered wigs are now no longer in fashion. You now have practical clothes, simple haircuts. And nationalism is now spreading. Nationalism is a strong feeling of pride and devotion to one's country. In earlier times, people had only felt loyalty to their local authorities, but now they're feeling this more national sense. The French people attend civic festivals. They're celebrating France. There's songs and dances on the theme of the revolution that are becoming popular. And in 1793, there's a port city called Marseille, and the troops marched to a new song. And Marseille, the song La Marseillaise, would later become France's national anthem, which still remains to this day. Revolutionaries are also pushing for social reform. They're setting up state schools, helping the poor, all sorts of stuff. And there was even a slave revolt raging in the colony of Haiti at the time called Saint Dominic. The government also abolished slavery in France's Caribbean colonies. And so there is some change happening. That's good change, like getting rid of slavery, allowing people to vote. But it's coming at such a dramatic cost. And this whole allowing people to vote thing isn't going to last very long. As soon as Napoleon comes to power, things are kind of crazy. In fact, they went so far to try and change things that they even set up an entirely new secular calendar that didn't revolve around church holidays at all. They literally made new months, new days of the week, new everything to try and say this is our own thing. Obviously, that didn't last, and today the French use our calendar as well. But not our calendar, but the calendar that most Western society uses. but a lot of craziness is happening, okay? But things are starting to settle. You have the Reign of Terror, you have the Directory, and now Monday, we will finish out this and we will talk about the Age of Napoleon. All right, so you do have a Juno pod, but good luck. You guys got this, and I'll talk to you soon. Bye.